We know we need an all hands on deck approach to address and mitigate climate change. We are reminded of it with every wildfire, every storm, every tornado that we see, and the scary air that came about recently from the wildfires in Canada, even, and how it carries so far. It's just, we need every industry and every government and every country to play a role in this. And that role is evolving with like every new climate related report and every storm. The role of the business sector is more front and center today than ever, as ESG issues and reporting requirements, that's environment, social, and governance issues, become more the cost of doing business, really, pressured by a range of stakeholders. It's no longer optional. But we also need to coordinate and collaborate with each other. We can't just be silos all over the world doing this work, right? So today we're going to find out how to accelerate progress and bring the sectors together and bring the countries together, from a woman who has been on the front lines of climate strategy and implementation since the very beginning of these discussions years ago. So let's get started. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We bring you insights and tips from remarkably innovative women about corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and ESG issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. We give career advice in every episode, especially at the end, but it's often sprinkled throughout if you listen carefully to our conversation. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts, on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes blog as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review if you are so inclined. It helps other people find us. Just want to say, if you're struggling with your own career, especially in this craziness and crazy economy, please reach out to me on Twitter and let me know. We can help you, no matter what industry you are in. So also, no matter what industry you're in, there's a role for your organization in this fight against climate change. No matter what kind of work you do or skills you bring, there's a role for you in this fight. And we need all of those roles in all of those industries, right? And identifying what the role might be, where investments might be targeted, and where the resources would best be focused to address climate change and build a more equitable and sustainable world has been the life's work, frankly, of our guest today, even well before it was probably even called sustainable or equitable, actually. We know that the only way sustainable and equitable systems will work, and the only way that reliable, effective strategies and technologies will be employed consistently enough to mitigate climate change, is if the private sector sees the financial benefit as well as seeing it as the right thing to do. And as I said in the introduction, we need all sectors working together, all countries working together. But how do we do that? Let's find out from a woman who's been doing it, actually. I'd like you to meet Aimee Christensen, CEO and founder of Christensen Global and the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience. Aimee has been helping leaders in all sectors lead and execute innovative programs that generate exponential results to address climate change, leveraging her deep experience in policy, investments, and philanthropy, including everyone from President Clinton to the UN Secretary General to the World Bank, Google, the Department of Energy, top law firms, et cetera, et cetera. She negotiated the first US bilateral climate change agreements and the first regional sustainable energy agenda for the Summit of the Americas, and has advised corporate clients on climate change strategy, policy, et cetera, for many things, many years, well before they were, as we say, a thing. I met Aimee years ago at the Clinton Global Initiative, where she was helping innovators and corporate government titans then just navigate climate policy and do so in a way that provides scale and aligns with their organization policy and goals, which is critical. They're not going to do it if it doesn't. She earned her BA from Smith College, her law degree from Stanford, and again, has been ahead of the curve forever. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Aimee Christensen to Electric Ladies podcast. Welcome, Aimee, my friend. I'm so thrilled to finally have you on my show.
Thank you so much, Joan. And thank you for that incredible introduction and really kind of laying out the background. It has been over 3 decades now. And so there was a lot to say. And I just really appreciate being here with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here and making the time. So I want to start out with what you're hearing, frankly, because you are in the rooms, you're on the phone, you have your ear to the ground, and you're hearing from top leaders and innovators, top philanthropists, frankly, and government leaders. So what are they telling you? What are their priorities? What are they concerned about?
Their priorities are moving as quickly as possible to carbonize. We have the overall global goal around net zero by 2050. But really what I'm hearing is, how do we go faster? How do we transform the key industries that are driving emissions now and that can be the solutions to our climate crisis, to our biodiversity crisis? They're really seeking, what are the strategies? Where should they be going strategically to shift capital, to shift their operations? And what are the blended capital strategies for financing climate solutions down their supply chains? As a philanthropy, how do they align with others who are also looking to shift their capital, their endowments, to align for net zero as soon as 2030 in the case of the Russell Family Foundation, the family with the Russell 500 index, really working from that legacy of financial leadership to align for net zero well ahead of the global goals, and to work with others to figure out how best to do so. So what I'm seeing is a great eagerness to learn, to act far ahead of the global targets by governments. So working with companies, working with local and regional and state governments, working with innovators to large corporates. What I'm hearing is, how do we go faster and how do we do it in a way that is truly credible?
Wow. So what's the answer? What is the answer that they're they're coming?
I mean, what I always like to do is to way back from when I was at Google in 2006, 2007, so early. What I like to do is say, okay, here's what the world needs. What are the assets that you bring to what the world needs? And how do we align for the culture and the assets of the company? So in that case, yes, Google was going to weigh in on and lobby for the California Global Warming Bill, because that was going to drive innovation, energy efficiency, benefits to their bottom line, benefits to California's economy. And we also, as we were just starting Google.org at the time, I was the third hire to the philanthropic arm of the company, was, we're going to operationalize, we're going to maximize the efficiency of our data centers at Google. We're going to lobby for AB 32. And what are we going to do as Google.org? Well, we're a technology company. Is there a technology solution that can help to solve climate change? And started to look at plug-in hybrids, the electrification of transportation. And could Google help to show the power of the electrification of transportation? In 2006, we were discussing this. There were one plug-in hybrid car in the world. And Google said, all right, let's make more plug-in hybrids out of regular hybrids. Let's track their performance with our engineers and our data tracking. And let's bring awareness. If this is truly a climate solution, let's bring awareness to it, because we can do that as Google. We can bring people to the campus. They can see the cars. They can see the data. We can show the cars plugged into the grid with the solar from our parking lots where we had just installed solar at the time, and show the future of the electrification of transportation. We connect electric cars, the transportation sector, to the electricity sector, and optimize the efficiency of both, and allow the grid to use the card for sprinting reserves. And so we presented this future. It was actually middle 2007 when we did our big launch event. It was the same week we announced going carbon neutral to align our operations with our climate goals, and brought people to campus to see what did that future look like, and then did strategic grant making around that, where we gave grants to the Brookings Institution to bring policymakers around the table. What does the future of accelerated electrification of transportation look like? And gave grants to academics working on vehicle to grid initiatives. So how could we help to accelerate that solution, which was a technology solution, but also needed policy and innovation and investment all around it. So that's what I love to do. Very long answer, but what I love to do is to see, here's what the world needs. What are the assets that you have? Align your operations, yes, aggressively and ahead of the Paris targets, as Google has. And what else can we bring to the table? And in this case, we could show the future electrification of transportation. That's the kind of clarity that industries need. You know, the auto industry at the time was struggling a great deal. The bailout, it was just about to happen. And so having that clarity to know, where do you invest as an industry? What's the future of that industry? Is it hydrogen? Is it more efficient ICE vehicles? Is it electricity? And, you know, we felt like a good bet was to do a lot of it through electrification of transportation, and made that case. And as we've seen now, thanks to a lot of innovators, including, really, we have to acknowledge Tesla's critical role. They were at the table at our meetings back then, 2006, 2007. And to show people that future and make a bet and get alignment so that industry and investors can move quickly towards that solution. It's just more efficient as we're working to solve climate change. And so that's what I love to do, is align what the assets are, what the culture is, with the solutions for what the world needs.
Well, that's an amazing story, actually, considering we're still wrestling with electric vehicles, and obviously Google is not an electric car company. So that's a really great example. By the way, one of the women I interviewed previously is Nihal Palmer, who was head of Google's the energy for Google's data centers for years, and then spun off to do her own EV company. Now I know where that came from, right? So I have 800 questions in my head, but let me go here. What I'm intrigued about is, you said, here's what needs to be done and what assets do you have? What you didn't say, which is interesting to me, is here's what the world needs. How do those align with your business goals? So you were focused on what they can bring to the table, which in addition to technology is cash, right? As it sounds. But how did the goals of the company fit into the strategy? Because I'm intrigued that you didn't even mention that.
So my job was, I was hired to be part of the philanthropic arm, which was integrated into the company. But my charge was, how can Google contribute to addressing our energy and environmental challenges? I knew that in order for us to do that, we needed to walk the walk, of course. And the good news is that was aligned with our business goals, which energy is a material cost for any technology data company. So already data centers were being built as efficiently as possible. But then were we moving to more and more renewable energy? So the company was moving in that direction. We did make a commitment to carbon neutrality, which was aligned with our business goals, because we didn't want to be building data centers with, say, the cheapest power in X location that happened to be fossil fuel generation, and then have a price on carbon show up later. That's a business risk. If you have a long-term power purchase agreement, you're buying power, and all of a sudden the price on carbon's in there, you can't move your data center from one location to another. So ensuring that you're upfront negotiating with the utility to provide the cleanest power possible now, and also increasingly clean power over time, that putting a price on carbon by going carbon neutral brought that discipline within the operations of the company. So with any company, it's like what Microsoft did. I worked with Microsoft to roll out their global carbon fee, just to help support them a bit on that. And 110 countries, all of a sudden you have a price on carbon throughout the operations of the company. That provides a signal to reduce emissions throughout the operations of the company globally. When Google goes carbon neutral, they're now paying a price for carbon. And because they wanted to do it, because if we're going to be lobbying for the California Global Warming Bill, if we're going to be trying to solve climate change with innovations around electrification of transportation, we also need to be walking the walk. And we, at the time, as you see now, a lot of people struggling with how do you do that in the right way? How do you source the right kinds of offsets? How do you first do efficiency, second do renewables, and third do credible offsets? And so it was going to be a sharing process of working with others to learn from each other as we're going to carbon neutrality. Now people call it net zero, but it's the same thing. It's a quality approach to decarbonizing a company's operations as quickly as possible. And you have to pay a price on carbon. It changes your decisions about your energy sourcing. So it's a strategic, smart business move to get ahead of compliance, knowing that a price on carbon likely is coming down the line and being prepared for it. That was the intersection with business. And it was also about the employees, because the employees had an expectation. Here's a company, don't be evil, as the tagline. So that was that decarbonization of the company, the leadership on climate change, very aligned with the don't be evil, and with a very relatively young employee base. At the time, we were 5,000 people when we started, 7,500 people when I left in 15 months, growing very fast. Young engineers who were always looking for solutions. A month after I got there, former Vice President Gore gave a talk about his slideshow about solving climate change. And at the end of it, the Googlers were said, if you want to work on climate, email Aimee. And I got all these emails from Googlers who want to work on climate, and they're engineers and they want to solve problems. They had incredible ideas. And so this was aligned with also employees and with potential recruits, people coming to the company. And so it's a way to attract and retain employees, as we know, this kind of leadership. So there were many ways in which it was aligned with the corporate goals for the bottom line, for the brand value, for the employees. But quite honestly, my job wasn't to look at that necessarily. My job was, how can Google help address climate change? And it was and they said, yeah, it's the right thing to do. We're going to lobby for AB 32 and we're going to make these things happen. So.
And you had to walk the walk, absolutely. And it aligns with stakeholder goals too. So what are these companies focused on? It's a great story. I love it. And it really illustrates so much of how this works together, including the policy piece, right? Because that was anticipating, looking down the line. So what are they looking at today? Are they being driven by, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a minute too, but are they being driven by the ESG criteria? Are they being driven by the employee challenge of keeping people now and recruiting the best talent? Are they being driven by the marketplace demanding it, because you can't even get a contract now of any kind really without being able to report your footprint, et cetera? So what is pushing them now to do this work? That was then. What is pushing them today? So
I would say all of the above. Every company is different, what mix of those and what is pushing them more, in my experience. What excites me the most right now that I'm doing is working with climate solutions companies who are working to grow net zero from inception. So here are these companies who are building products, whether it's building technologies or food technologies, and they are looking to grow as low carbon or zero carbon as they can from the beginning. And so it's a whole different thing. So with larger corporates who I've worked with, it's, you set your baseline and you reduce from there, and you have tools to do so. With these companies, they are working from the very beginning, partnering with energy companies to grow from the very beginning of building out their manufacturing facilities to be as low carbon as zero carbon as possible, so that the product they're producing is in a supply chain of a much larger company who is also looking to live up to their corporate goals and expectations, and they can feed well strategically into that supply chain. So for instance, Hempatecture, fantastic hemp-based building materials company here in Idaho. I'm on their board and I've been an advisor since before that. And they worked with the utility to source green energy for their manufacturing facility that just opened in February in Jerome, Idaho, a couple hours to my south. Working with a food technology company called Aleph Farms out of Israel. It's cultivated meat, amazing company that has been working to be as net zero or zero carbon as they can from the very beginning of the company. They did an agreement with Engie to provide clean energy as they work to build out their manufacturing facilities around the world. They've, let their investors know and their partners know, and that's their plans to grow as low or zero carbon as possible from the beginning of the company. And that way they're strategically positioned. They don't have to later set a baseline or reduce. The goal, right, is to reduce that need to transition. It's embedded in the culture. It's embedded in the business strategy. That's what gets me the most excited. So I know I pivoted a bit from your question about where are those larger corporates now, but I get excited about these new companies, which are the Googles of the future, right? The new big companies, they're growing from the beginning. It's just embedded in who they are.
Well, I love that. And it's important because in a way, it's also the tail wagging the dog, because the big companies can't do the innovation at the speed and scale that they need to in-house. They're going to need to acquire these companies and work with them. And in fact, it's kind of what's cool about that is it flips the power structure a little bit in the supplier relationship, because it says, well, we want to be your supplier, and this is how we're doing it, and we're not going to suddenly start taking dirty fuel to lower the cost or whatever. In fact, today it's cheaper actually to have green energy, but
yes,
we're not going to change how we do business, downgrading it sustainably in order to be your supplier. Mm-hmm. And so I almost wonder if kind of the reverse of the Walmart sustainability supplier agreement from 25 years ago, where they forced suppliers to become green. Now it almost sounds like the suppliers might push the big companies, in addition to the downward pressure from the ESG reporting requirements and the SEC, to pivot faster. Right?
I think they're enabling them to. They're really enabling them to. They're providing a solution in their supply chain. And it's fantastic. For instance, in the case of Olive Farms, the cultivated meat company, one of their investors is Cargill, right? Biggest meat processor in the world. So you're right about where does the innovation come from? It often comes from outside the large companies. You have also with Hempatecture, here they are, this startup innovator in the building materials space, and large scale existing players in the building materials space very interested. Okay, what is this innovation? Where's it coming from? But often it comes from these companies who have this idea, who invest in the building out of the idea, and then those other players can come in as investors or customers or joint venture partners, and that helps together with the capital and the infrastructure of the larger players to scale up the new players and bring them to market more quickly. So it really becomes a synergistic, collaborative approach. And then we need the policymakers to help to create the right market signals, to help to accelerate and facilitate the transformation in the energy sector, the building sector, the food sector, that allows the partnerships between the large corporates already in the market and the startups to accelerate these technologies to market.
Well, what I love about what you do, and I want to talk about the new policies in a second, the new legislation, sure, but it's almost like, it's funny because I kind of do this too, but you do it on a much bigger scale. You think on multi-dimensions, it sounds like at the same time. So when you're working with these organizations, you're saying, well, here's the policy driver, here's the market driver, here's the philanthropic driver, if you will. And so where do you put the priority on that? I mean, do you, when they ask you, how do we get to carbon zero? Where do you start with that? Because you're thinking about all of the pieces simultaneously, which is part of your magic, but it's also hard to explain sometimes to executives that are kind of looking at their vertical, right?
Yeah. Well, I think just starting with the basics of the strategies to align for a decarbonized world. So maximize energy efficiency from the beginning, that everyone really gets that easily because that reduces your energy costs. So making that analysis between your CapEx and your OpEx, and okay, let's say we invest in this technology within our manufacturing facility that's going to reduce our energy use, perhaps it has a premium. Sometimes they don't now. There's been so much innovation, but perhaps it has a premium. How quick is that payback? If this is a 30-year facility, 50-year facility, payback's 5 years, 7 years. It's for the company to make that judgment call. But in addition to the cost savings and how quick the payback is from integrating efficiency from the beginning, is again the brand benefit, the competitive benefit versus competitors in their sector, and the attraction of employees. And so and the potential price on carbon if their energy source has any carbon to it. So the more efficient you are, you mitigate that. And then moving to clean energy and setting up contracts for that provision of clean energy or building on site, and how that can reduce price risk of your power source. And then the extent to which you want to be net zero, sourcing offsets, and you can source offsets in a strategic way where you're potentially investing down your supply chain. So what people will sometimes call insetting. So how do we, if you have a net zero commitment to scopes 1 and 2, can you invest in your scope 3 to help decarbonize it in advance of your net zero goal for your scope 3 emissions? So you can help in a collaboration with your supplier to decarbonize that supply chain together. And so that you are working with your supplier to align for net zero with you. And it won't just be you, because you're not the only buyer.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great model. It's a great model. So since you're part of you is a policy wonk, the trifecta of legislation passed by the last Congress and signed by President Biden, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act, are quite powerful, especially together. It's over $1 trillion of investment in and financial incentives to address climate change in one way or another, right? But the funds are going to take a while to be dispersed. I mean, they've started, and they'll take even longer to show up in progress. I saw that the Department of Transportation, for example, I think it was, put out a map, or maybe it was the White House put out a map of 32,000 projects that have started around the country in every state, around something in every state from these bills to kind of start to show the progress. But what's your take on what the impact of the legislation will be and how long it will take to really have people and companies feel it in their own neighborhoods, in their own supply chains, and really take it? Are they taking advantage of it too, is the other part of that?
Well, it's interesting. There's a wide range of to what extent states are jumping up to go after this money. If you look state by state, what I find really interesting living in Idaho, which is what we would call a red state, and then working with companies who work across the country and around the world, but across the country, is that state leadership is incredibly divergent. And if you look, for instance, at the state of Georgia and all of the solar manufacturing facilities, battery manufacturing facilities, even just recently awarded coastal restoration dollars from the IRA, they are a huge winner. And so this does take state leadership in order to go after these funds. And without that, these states are missing out. And so it is a game changer. It is, it takes some investment to work to go after the funds and organize yourselves and bring on efforts to help to respond to the federal opportunities. That being said, the resources really are a game changer for the bottom line. And so you're seeing these new announcements of new facilities as a result of this capital being available. So the capital is being decided upon and awarded, USDA, DOE, EPA, et cetera. Capital is being awarded, the decisions are being made, and the investment dollars are flowing. Even if the government dollars may be coming down the line, they know it's coming because they've been awarded the money, at least to start. And it's continuing over time. So what I'm seeing is that it is real a moment of what a friend of mine calls the great deployment for climate solutions because of this catalytic government funding coming in. I wish, I'll just put this out there, that we were also addressing the thumb on the scale for fossil fuels in the form of subsidies that continue to exist at the federal level, as well as state regulatory structural subsidies, not letting competition into certain states, including my own, from renewable energy resources, which I wish we could have a very level playing field to start with. So we do have this thumb on the scale from subsidies, and it's time to eliminate those. And same within the agricultural sector as well with the Farm Bill. We have Farm Bill coming up. Powerful financial tool that's at cross purposes with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and CHIPS Act to some extent, but definitely the first two. So when you have a farm bill that's subsidizing agricultural practices that undermine the climate, and then you have Inflation Reduction Act. So we need to get greater alignment, being clear about what is our, for lack of a better, industrial policy at the federal level, being clear, what are we promoting? What is our future? Recognizing that the transition is complicated, of course, and we need to protect especially the most vulnerable communities. So if they are relying on fossil fuels, let's recognize that and not make a transition that's going to harm them, have a thoughtful, smart transition to allow for this, especially in the communities who've been harmed by the legacy fossil fuel industry. How do we make sure they get access to? And the Justice 40 Initiative administration is incredibly smart with making sure that at least 40% of the federal dollars are going to qualifying projects to support that justice for those who have suffered most, and ensuring opportunities are there as well. So it's just, I feel like the government's going through the throes of working to get in alignment with our global climate goals, and for that matter, biodiversity goals as well.
And it's messy. I think part of it is, by the way, an episode that I dropped yesterday is with Jackie Patterson of the Chisholm Project, who is actually executing on the Justice 40 stuff and helping make sure that those communities that are really, I frame them as lost. I mean, they're just like, they're so off the grid that they don't even know there's a grid, right? That they get some of these resources too. So I'm glad you put a pin in that. But do you think that these inconsistencies are how they negotiated getting the infrastructure? Like the infrastructure bill is bipartisan, the others were all Democrats. So do you think that was part of the negotiation was, well, we won't touch this even though we know it's at cross purposes like the Farm Bill, that was just part of how they got this through? But everybody, including Republicans that voted against the bill, are touting the money that's going to their own neighborhoods.
Yeah. And like you said, it's messy. There are legacy interests and political, quote unquote, realities that are being dealt with. And, the pipeline through Virginia, the Willow drilling project, there's messiness in there. And the good news is that directionally, the vast majority is going in the right direction. And the key is to bring the legacy interests to the table, knowing that they need to make this change as quickly as possible, knowing that there is going to be economic harm for not doing so, whether it's stranded assets, a price on carbon, and there's an opportunity for getting in early. And that's the challenge, as I see some lagging still by some of the legacy interests, utilities, oil and gas, et cetera, and don't want them to make the mistake of the coal industry, which is, holding on until you file bankruptcy, and who gets hurt the most? The workers, right? How do we bring these massive players in, get involved sooner, bring your worker as skills, knowledge, your technologies, and your capital to building the new clean economy much more quickly. And right now, it's just far too slow and far too little of their resources being deployed. So accelerating that with putting a price on carbon with regulatory incentives. And right now it's really on the incentive side because it is messy, and the incentive side is easier to get done. Let's put money behind the good stuff while we still continue to have some of the subsidies on the other side.
Well, the good part of that strategy is then the legacy companies and industries will see the benefits from the investment. That'll be some of their incentive to change.
Yes.
So they go, I want to seize that opportunity. Wait a minute, I didn't know that was going to be that big of an opportunity. I want to do that too. So that's also a really good segue to this issue of ESG reporting, because they're also being driven, legacy companies and all companies, even if you're not publicly traded, with the SEC rules, climate risk disclosure rules coming out, they're being driven by the marketplace requiring them to disclose also and be held accountable for that, because they have to be verified, right? So what's your take, and you can disagree with me, I'm happy to have it, discuss it, but what's your take on the current ESG reporting systems and the, like that whole, is that really providing pressure or not?
Yes.
It is.
No question. And for those who for whom it's not yet, it's just because of a lack of, I think, awareness at this point. We'll actually be having a speaker at the Sun Valley Forum next week, Aimee Nack, speaking about exactly this and what the ramifications are, no matter what size company, what the implications are. And yes, significant. The transparency, the power of transparency can't be understated. I recall when EPA first started to require just the reporting of emissions of certain toxics back in the day, the power of that sunlight onto that data created pressure for those companies to reduce, even if there wasn't a financial penalty for that pollution. And here, starting with that transparency, we need greater clarity around standardization of reporting so that people can see apples to apples. It's a little messy right now, but the transparency is very powerful. And you have more and more solution providers getting into that space of helping to provide that clarity of what those risks are. I'm actually an advisor to a company called riskthinking.ai, founded by Dr. Ron Dembo. He founded Algorithmics, one of the early enterprise risk management software companies, and is bringing his lens to climate, and is partnered with Bloomberg. Bloomberg's an investor in the company, and they'll be working to bring through that climate risk information onto the Bloomberg terminal. So when you're looking at public equities, you can see the climate risk information and dig in, where does that risk come from? Which climate models, which ramifications of climate risk? So is it physical risk? Access to water, if you're a company relying on water resource in specific locations? Is it sea level rise? Is it storms? Is it transition risk because there's going to be a price on carbon and your steel manufacturing facilities are high carbon intensity? What does that look like for the company? And this approach that they take is what's called stochastic risk assessment, probabilistic risk assessment, so that you can take the information and weigh the probabilities, but really add that additional insight, which is critical. So ESG data, climate data, this is fundamental, the bottom line of the company, both now, because it does have ramifications for brand value and employee retention and attraction, inefficiency for your energy costs, and especially for the nearer future than we'd like, as we're seeing climate impacts increase. And I just think that transparency, that sunshine, is going to be really powerful.
Yeah, and Mother Nature doesn't wait for our deliberations, right?
Right.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that. And of course, the transition risk is something that they need to report in the coming SEC rules too. Two things to point out. Three things. One is, actually, I know Aimee Nack. I met her years ago. I'll be delighted to see her again next week at your conference. But the other is, I interviewed Christina Wyatt, who led the task force developing the climate risk disclosure rules at the SEC. And so she goes into exactly how they went about this. And this is, the drive is investors seeking comparability, consistency, and reliability, which is obviously accuracy. and therefore having it verified. So I want to ask you a couple more things and then get some career advice from you for our audience. But speaking of verified, I'm a little biased because I worked in accounting firms for years. I'm not an accountant, I promise. You do not want me near your accounting systems. But I have helped them grow their businesses and do the messaging and today do some ESG work. But so, and they are really the hub of the wheel in this because they have to verify the data. So you talked about risk thinking. I've interviewed several companies also developing ESG tools and software. How does that get verified? Because we're in an age where so much happens after the data is entered. But if it's garbage in, it's going to be garbage out. And how do we get the accuracy in the beginning correct and eliminate the bias?
Oh, it's such a good question. It has to be additional transparency to what has been integrated into the model and how. So, right. So how do we know if you have a stock, for instance, that has a climate risk rating? What is contributing to that climate risk rating? Is it on the physical risk side? Which climate models are determining that? Are those credible models? Hopefully any climate model that's being used within a tool like this is, but then understanding which climate risk model is better depending upon which topic, right? Which risk, which storm industry? Risk, sea level rise, which industry, which geography. And then also on the transition risk, really understanding how is that weighting taking place of the power of the risk facing a certain geography based upon the type of policy coming down the line. That's the tougher piece. And I think it's just the quality and the transparency and having the transparency to know what is that based upon? What is that assumption based upon? Knowing what's in there. I completely agree with you. Garbage in, garbage out. And we can't just take them on face value. We really have to understand that.
Yeah. And those assumptions are always the key to everything, right? It's got to read the footnotes. So one of the stakeholders we haven't talked about, and I don't want to leave them out of the discussion, is us, the public. So how do we motivate? Because these policymakers are obviously responding to their constituents, however they define them, which today is a whole nother ball of tomatoes. But how do we motivate the public? The consumers say they want, the polls, the research shows that they want to buy this. Some of the market trends show that they want to buy more sustainably. But how do we motivate the public and engage more of the public in this urgent need to address climate change and transform the whole economy to a carbon zero economy? Because it's, we're so, this short-term focus, it's like what's in front of me. But as we said, Mother Nature isn't going to wait for you to get your act together and wake up. It's not going to be tomorrow, even though, and some people don't even relate the storms that are in their own neighborhood to climate change. That doesn't even always create the urgency that we need. So how do we get a mass level of constituency of the public on board with this?
So two things, primary kind of top line. One is to have the solutions that are in there as better options for what they do every day. So is it that decarbonized food tastes better? They enjoy it more, whether it's plants, veggies, cultivated meat. So there's have better options. Electric vehicles are more fun to drive, faster off the line, and cleaner air and quiet. And here in the mountains, it's really nice to be able to keep your car warm for an older person in the car or a dog in the car in the winter when it's really, really cold and you're not polluting. So better options through technology innovation and deployment, and that save money and the operating costs of those. And in the case of healthier food, it results in health benefits to you. So it may be a later bottom line. If there is a premium to the cost, the fortunate thing is these costs are coming down dramatically. And the potential for cultivated meat is for it to be much cheaper than industrial meat over time. So we're getting there. And so having that technology option readily accessible, zero cost. And so some of that is business model innovation as well. For instance, there's a company called Spring Free EV that is financing fleet electrification for drivers of cars. They can get an electric vehicle and pay by the mile. And it's cheaper than what they were paying for a gas car, because it's cheaper to have an electric car than a gas car. And that also makes the company, it's a nice business model for them. So there, these business model innovations, technology innovations, better options, cheaper, easier, better for the driver. One. Two, behavior. We have got to go faster. I remember a decade or so ago, Shell talking about the climate models. Shell has always been, I think, well regarded for their climate modeling and the future of energy systems and what does the future of the climate look like, and doesn't mean that they necessarily have acted on those at the pace we would like. But they talked about how in order to get alignment with our climate goals, we need a behavior change to accelerate that, not just technology innovation and scaling of deployment. And the IEA projections as well, I think, would say the same. So how do we get individuals to use less energy, to change what they're eating, to buy less, to swap more, rent more, and share more,
yeah.
Recycle more. Yeah, recycling is a whole other topic.
I know.
Highly frustrating. Reuse more, and that, I think, the key. There are a couple of, early education. It just becomes part of who you are growing up. My mom is an environmental educator. She has been doing it for over 50 years, teaching children about nature and how amazing it is. And then they want to protect it and how to recycle and how to do other things in their lives. And it's so powerful when it's just, you love nature and you want to protect it and you grew up that way. So environmental education, outdoor programs, et cetera, really important. And then I think peer-to-peer, we see people who go solar in your neighborhood, and then other neighbors come over and say, oh, I've been thinking about that, but I didn't know how. There's so much sitting on the sidelines when it comes to adoption of new technologies or switching to eating more plants. So being out with friends, oh, why'd you order that? That's vegan. Oh, actually, I've been vegan for 20 years and here's why. And just sharing and creating community around this. And then also helping, if you have been the homeowner in your neighborhood who figured out how to go solar easily, who do you recommend helping that? So I founded the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience here in Sun Valley to help to accelerate our community in building resilience. And the first thing we did was a Solarize campaign. And this is something that started in Portland. Department of Energy has kind of provided a best practices of how to do a Solarize campaign. And you get together with your community or a nonprofit or government or others, and you just work with the solar installers to offer a lower cost for the installation. You bring the public, educate the public, bring them in, and the solar installers offer a lower cost for the installation. And we got 5 times the amount of solar installed in 20 weeks as the entire year before. A couple of companies merged as a result, and because a lot of people just don't know how. And so having that peer-to-peer or on-the-ground organization and making something we're all doing together. And we have friends here in Idaho who did that under our program, and their power bill is now $5 a month. So they're very happy about it. So that's
you're making it easier for them too.
Yes.
One of the things, just real quick to put a button on that, is that one of the things that's cool about you, and you've been demonstrating it, frankly, in this interview a bit, is storytelling. Is to, when you show people, when you explain to people through stories what the impact is, how much, it can make their lives better and reduce their, the best way to reduce your healthcare costs is to stay healthy. Right? Yes. So it's kind of funny how that works. It's not always in your control, but you can do the best we can with what we do have control over, right? So what I've been interested in watching you over the years is your ability to tell the story that has to get to drive people's actions, right? So before I let you go, I'd like to get some career advice for women. And when I say that, I mean mid-career women who want to use their education, their experience of, say, 15 years, to make it, but they also want to make a difference. They're ambitious, they want to advance, they want to make money. So what advice would you give to them?
So something that I felt like I've tried to do in my career that's been important has been to trust my gut and to be a truth teller. Those are two things. And a truth teller in with an advisor to a CEO of a company, and someone else is telling them, oh, your climate action is fine. You're so great. You're doing wonderfully. And I know actually it's not aligned with where we need to be going. And I believe it's in your corporate interest, bottom line interest, to lead and get ahead of this. I'm going to say so. And I'm also going to say, even if it's not immediately in your bottom line interest, this is leadership. And I know you well enough to know you want to lead. And so having those hard conversations where you're asking the hard question that people have missed in the room. You're saying, gosh, do I have to ask this question? I really do. What about this? I was at Milk and Global financial conference 2014 or 15 and was so frustrated about the energy conversation. It was all about oil and gas. And I just said, what about renewables? Look at Germany, what they were doing at the time. And, what about renewables? Here's how fast it's growing. And I had to do it. I was actually in the back texting with Van Jones, was in the audience, and he was an old friend, and he's like, raise your hand in all caps. So sometimes you need somebody to kick you a little bit to be the truth teller, but I did. And what happened later is a very senior executive from a very large investment bank approached me in the elevator and said, I agree with you. I believe renewables is a great investment opportunity. And here's what we're doing and where we're going, what we're thinking about. And we had a great conversation about it. So people are looking for community. So even if you think you might be the only one who's raising this issue, people are looking for support to be leaders. You will find your people. And if you don't speak your truth, if you don't ask the hard question, you won't find the people who are looking to align with that aggressive leadership. And trust your gut on that. So trust your gut, whether it's about a new job or about a direction we need to be going in, even if it feels a little bit lonely, because you may see it early, go for it. You'll be proven. People will find you and want to collaborate with you.
I love that. And I do the same thing, by the way. Every time I ask questions in in a session or something, people come up to me and say something like, I didn't know I needed to know that, wanted to know that until you asked it. And then it was like, oh, thank you so much,
Love that.
Speaking of asking questions, I'm excited for your forum next week and to be asking a bunch of questions there, which everybody can stay tuned for later. But I thank you so much. Any final thoughts before I let you go?
No, I would just say, the reason why I do the forum is I love to convene the conversations that need to happen and to feature the solutions that need the partners and the scaling, and to watch the magic that happens when you get the people in the room, multi-sectoral, the food people talking to the energy people because they want to clean up their food manufacturing, the investors talking to the philanthropists. Hey, how do we align our blended capital to help accelerate deployment of key climate solutions? It's just magical. And so the power of curation, the power of connection, I'm really passionate about. So just thank you for providing an opportunity, for joining us next week at the Sun Valley Forum, and for what you do to help to illuminate the solutions and the ideas that we need to do in this time. Thanks, Joan.
Oh, you're welcome, Aimee. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on Electric Ladies Podcast, Aimee Christensen of Christensen Global. So what do you think will truly engage companies and organizations to expedite addressing climate change and get to carbon zero? Post it on Twitter at Joan Michelson and send us any questions for Aimee or me there. You may win a 30-minute session with me, so who knows? Please subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our talented, amazing guests like Aimee, our articles and career advice. You can subscribe on electricladiespodcast.com. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.